Just think about some of the neighborhoods that our kids in St. Louis Public Schools even occupy. Can we even call them neighborhoods, right? Can we even think about the built environment, right, around what it means to live and be in some of those spaces, and like how that affects learning and that affects the ways in which we experience joy and pleasure and happiness and excitement around what it means to just be a learner.
Hi, Sherita. Thanks for coming doing this interview with me. It's a pleasure to have you.
Sure, sure.
So, tell me about your personal career so far and how you ended up at the Education Equity Center of St. Louis.
Yeah, I'll try to make it short and sweet. But born and raised in St. Louis. Went to St. Louis Public Schools, pre-K to 8, where I was basically star student. Went to a neighborhood school in St. Louis Public Schools. School right across the street. Everyone in my neighborhood went there. My family, lived. You know, we were, 5 or 6 houses deep in the neighborhood, so family was there. Teachers, at that time, all looked like me, all but one. I believe I had, K to 8, one white teacher. And then so I talk a lot about how I was really affirmed, like in my brilliance, and, just a kid who's like, wow, I want to be able to do what these people do for me when I grew up. So I wanted to be a teacher just because of that reflection and that mirror, really. And then I went out to Parkway for my high school experience. Went to Parkway North, and quickly noticed the unnamed. Like noticed this thing that was unnamed, but of course, there were at that time there weren't many Black or brown students who were in the space. Struggled to access the curriculum, struggled to access the learning in the same ways that I had been accustomed to. Noticed, one, just the separation of folks in the space, but then also just this unnamed thing that I was experiencing that, of course, was racism, but really didn't have the language to understand, or the context to really understand like what was at play. And knowing that, for me, it was like knowing that it was something bigger than just the ways that we were treated. Like there was something else that was happening there. So I also went to college here, Harrison, Upsall, Lindenwood. I had children really early. I was pregnant with my oldest daughter when I left, well, in high school, my senior year of high school. And so it took a while for me to finish my degree, and went into professional life for a bit. And once I did, finish, went into the classroom after that and started to notice the same thing. Of course, throughout my college career, throughout my career and professional life, noticed the same thing. But then going back to education, the pervasiveness is what was really stark and what really stood out. That not only was I still experiencing the same shit myself as an educator, but then also seeing the same thing play out for the students that I aim to support as a Black teacher, right? Like seeing the same mess through a number of spaces, left the classroom. My mother became terminally ill, so I chose to leave the classroom after a few years, take on her care. Found nonprofit education space, found that I loved that space. There's a bit more freedom in that space. There's a bit more I'm not a person that well, let me not say what I'm not. I am a person that likes different challenges and needs like, the mix of things happening in my space. And so nonprofit education space allowed that for me. So I really liked it. So anyway, through just a number of either entrepreneurial ventures, going back to school, studying African American studies, studying ways in which race like intersects with education, getting certified in this and that and whatever, eventually landed in this space where I had an opportunity to begin the work that we're doing now about 4 years ago.
And what is the Education Equity Center's mission?
What we choose to, the data, the research, the path that we choose to walk down with our strategy focuses on primarily educators, understanding the power that educators have to shape and share and give life to, students, understanding that, students are in this system for 13 plus years and go in and receive the messages about who they are, who they're not, their worth in society, their place in society, and then come out on the other side of this system and replicate the societal ways, the socialization around racist ideals and ideologies, and even racialized identity. And so we choose to focus on educators for a number of reasons. Again, our kids spend most of their time, their daily, activities are in school, in learning spaces with educators. Not just in St. Louis, not just in Missouri, but in this country, we're looking at about 90% white women who are in front of children. And again, if we connect that to our socialization as individuals living in the United States, where we all receive the same messages about, the worth of not just ourselves, but of others who have different racialized identities than we do. We believe that there's enormous power in what and how teachers support student learning. And so we choose to really focus on building anti-racist capacity of educators in St. Louis. And so there's 4 spaces. So build anti-racist capacity of educators, activate those educators towards systems change, co-create education equity with educators, students, and families, and then being accountable. The 4th piece is being accountable to what the data is telling us, like how we think about data, not just in our own individual institutions, individual classrooms, but then regionally, how are we progressing towards a more fully equitable, a more fully just education system.
Tell me about some of your recent projects. Tell me what you got going on.
So when we talk about capacity building, right? Like how do we build or approach building anti-racist capacity of educators in St. Louis? We have what we call just like general open to the public ways in which we approach that work. And it's really donation based. We have what we call Saturday schools and summer schools, where we offer these workshops quarterly. And they're 3-day workshops. I want to say 3 days, 3 hours. Each workshops focused on historical implications of racism in U.S. society and how it impacts education, applying a systems focus to, our approach around equity in St. Louis, and then what does it look like to action plan around data. So those is really the 3 spaces in which the summer schools and Saturday schools operate. And mainly those, again, it's open to the public, but 85% of folks who come are classroom teachers responsible for direct instruction. And the rest are like administrators, board members, and folks who are in education focused organizations. So that's one way. And like I mentioned, like the DEI to anti-racism in education cohort, we ran one of those in the spring, and we start another today for 6 weeks. We have a anti-racist educators for systems change fellowship that starts in October, and that's really working with 10 educators and administrators in St. Louis focused on systems change in their institution. Again, it's 9 months, pretty intensive program of support. And then what was the other thing I was going to mention around capacity building? Oh, the Alumni Coalition. So anyone who's attended workshops, gone through a fellowship, gone through a cohort experience. We host monthly alumni events as well to again continue with building, an anti-racist community of practice and community continue capacity building and support for one another. And then the other thing I'll mention is this piece around co-creation at this point. So one, we've set a table of folks who are focused on education data in the region. Like I mentioned, Ford through Ferguson, WashU, SEAC and UMSL, SLU Prime Center, and others. We're coming together to work on like what does it look like to collaborate on the ways that we both approach data and use data such that we're not creating these many, many reports that sit on a shelf and collect dust, but rather how do they remain relevant and hopefully get activated in the spaces that we all occupy as, data focused leaders in the education equity space. So that's of course in progress because it takes time, right, to build trust and to think about ways that we can approach such a thing. So that's one way that we're setting the table for, data accountability. And then we're working pretty intensively with the mayor's office, St. Louis Public Schools, We Power and Forward through Ferguson on K-12 redesign for St. Louis City. And it hasn't officially been, like I said, announced. That's why I'm like, can I talk about that? It hasn't officially been announced, but it is kind of public. It went kind of public a few weeks ago and at a St. Louis Public Schools board meeting. And so I can share, just a little bit about it because again, it went kind of public, but that's all I'll kind of share about that.
And how does having the right type of space in a school improve the learning environment for all students?
Yeah, space is, of course, critically important. You think about the built environment. You think about, again, everything it comes back to systemic racism, and a built environment is very much a part of that. You think about recent studies that talk about, some, low income areas that have experienced divestment and blight, and just think about some of the neighborhoods that our kids in St. Louis Public Schools even occupy. Can we even call them neighborhoods, right? Can we even think about the built environment, right, around what it means to live and be in some of those spaces and like how that affects learning and that affects the ways in which we experience joy and pleasure and happiness and excitement around what it means to just be a learner. If you really think about, you know what I mean? You really think about that. So yeah, the built environment is critically important. You think about, access to what technologies that might or may not be inside a building or inside a classroom. The technologies of the 21st century, the technologies of today that might be present in some classroom. Access to, think about it in a COVID world, access to, computers and laptops and high-speed internet and all the things that you would need to easily transition or be in a virtual environment that doesn't exist everywhere. Access for educators to have the technology that they need to teach in the built environment and in a classroom to effectively serve every student is not something that is present in every space. And so, that environment is critical to, how I experience learning and joy and excitement around learning or not.
And how would you provide for these communities? What are some ways that we as a community could provide for these students in a way that maybe a school shouldn't?
Right. That's a really, really nuanced question because, if what you're getting at is like, yeah, what would we need to do then to yeah, like you said, take the load off of school systems being, having to bear the brunt of so many communal issues, like, right. So,
Mhm.
policing in schools and like you said, providing food and laundering clothes, and some there's district not far from here that provides housing even for unhoused students. So how and what. So there's many ways that we would approach legislation around what needs to happen. I don't even know if that needs to be the first stop. The simplest answer is anti-racist practice and policy that is addressing systemic issues that, of course, intersect with education, because all of the stuff does. There's not a system that doesn't connect to education, banking, housing, food, the legal system, it all intersects with education. And so there's a, very tangled web of how we would address that, because these are societal issues that it's going to take a while to untangle, right? Such that it is not affecting education, but rather we are taking a very strategic approach to say, we need to address food insecurity. How do we do that? Largely in communities that experience first the most food insecurity, right? So how do we do that? And then how do we think about, health and healthcare and access and all that? So you get what I'm saying? So it's not just there's a piece of legislation that needs to be addressed and blip, it all is going to fall away from the school system.
Mm-hmm.
It's addressing many things that will then begin to lighten the load of what we see landing as a responsibility of education to fix. Appreciate that you reached out and, were interested in hearing, about the work of the Equity Center and, our approach and all that. So thanks.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Take care of yourself. Let me know if you need anything else.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Have a good one.
All right, bye.